Dear friends and colleagues, a very good afternoon to all of you. In the lecture series under the celebration of 75th year of Indian independence, today we have with us Dr. Simashree Bora. She is an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology at Cotton University, Guwahati, Assam. Her research involved gender studies, sociology of religion, and ecological studies. She is an alumnus of the Cotton College. She did her post-graduation and doctoral research in sociology from the School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Prior to join at Cotton University, she taught at South Asian University, Maharashtra National Law School, and Jyoti Dalal School of Liberal Arts at Narsi Monji Institute of Management Studies, Mumbai. Over to you, Dr. Simashree Bora.
Oh, just a minute. I'm just setting up my. I hope I'm audible. Yeah?
Yes, you are perfectly audible.
All right, great. So first of all, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk on a topic which is, in fact, in the current scenario, in the contemporary socio-political history, it's extremely important to talk about. And I'm glad that you've chosen this topic for discussion. I'll try my best to talk about some of the fundamental questions, fundamental issues pertaining to women's participation, roles, and would be critically also looking at how they are historically been part of, dominant narrative or not, So therefore, as the title, goes by, as you can see, Situating Assamese Women and Their Roles in India's Freedom Struggle. We all know that, it's when we talk about India's freedom struggle, it's such a huge, time frame, and so many different episodes are part of this, come under this one umbrella term that we always use called freedom struggle, right? So I will try to talk about Assam situation at the backdrop of nationalist history and India's freedom struggle. So as you can say, can someone start the PPT? If right, thank you so much. So the entire talk will be is organized within this theme, situating Assamese women, their political activities, mobilization, and women's organization at the backdrop of Indian women in India's freedom struggle, and also located within history of national struggle and colonial history, within which I will try to talk about Assam in India's freedom struggle, because interestingly, the history of colonial Assam, witness a lot of various episodes, and also the interesting history that this Northeast, as a region that we have, right? So therefore, I will also be just, in the beginning of the talk, I will also try to understand, try to talk about regional nationalism versus this, grand narrative of nationalism, and then finally come to women in public memory and gender nationalism, where I'll be specifically talking, we'll be talking about, Assamese women as freedom fighter, martyrs, and how they are being presented, and at the same time absent from public memory and from the grand narrative of nationalist history. So just to Can we just move on to the next slide? Okay, so before I start to talk about women freedom fighters and martyrs of Assam, I would just simply like to mention that when we talk about colonial Assam, annexation of Assam in 1926 formalized colonial rule in Assam, and it was included under Bengal presidency. And right after that, several revolts and protests arose against British imperialism. Some of the historical episode, execution of many revolutionaries from Assam, for their revolutionary activities and participating in freedom struggle. And just to name a few, we have Dhananjay Buragohain, Pioli Phukon, Jiuram Medhi, and Moniram Devan. And between 1930 to 1857, where they were executed for their revolutionary activities, and these were marked as the beginning of freedom struggle in Assam. So when we talk about freedom struggle, the phase of, when we talk about freedom struggle in Assam context, in the Northeast, we also know the phase of an emergence of sub-nationalism can also be seen from 1850 to post-independent period, where different modes of regional consciousness emerged, mostly kind of, in a very popular terminology, what we call as Ahomia nationalism or Assamese nationalism or regional nationalism emerged in 1850 on the issues of Assamese language, when the middle class was raising their voices against their anti-nationalist sentiments brought by the imperialist policies. The peasant class was raising their voices against the land revenue policies of the British, land revenue policies of the British. So from the year 1861 to 1893, there were no progress to improve the conditions of the marginal class. So if there were middle class interested in sub-nationalist movement, peasant rebellions like, Fulaguri Dhava of 1861, Romia demonstration, Lasima and Pothorughata Ron in 1893 to 1894, etc. These marked their ways where thousands of peasants participated against British tax policy. There was also another group of people who still protested against the hegemonic nature of Brahminical Vaishnavism in Assam. So we see that, how different kind of demonstrations and protests were already taking place, at the public sphere. But interestingly, where women were far from these two public spheres, both religion and politics. So when we have this kind of, social arrangement, which is reflected in the public sphere as well, where do we locate women freedom fighters, women's role in, and especially women's political activities in the freedom struggle of India? So we have, when we kind of try to understand the history, there are popular names and including several of martyrs as well as freedom fighters from Assam. So as you can see, I've started with Konoklata Bora. She's known as the youngest Shaheed or Birwala of India's independence movement, who was shot dead by the British police while leading a procession holding the national flag that was to be hoisted at the police station in Gopur subdivision on 28 September 1942. Konoklata was only 17 years old. Her participation in Quit India movement and sacrifice for India's freedom is strongly present in public memory of Assamese people. During the movement, she joined Mritu Bahini, which was a death squad mainly comprised of youth. So Mrityu Bahini, along with another organization named Shanti Bahini, was formed by Pushpalata Das, who played a seminal role in India's freedom struggle. So Pushpalata Das was a Gandhian who was also a member of All India Congress Committee and convener of Women's Wings of Assam Congress Committee. Hailing from North Lakhimpur, Assam, her political activities started from a very tender age, and she became the secretary of Mukti Sangha. She and her comrades took out a protest against hanging of Shahid Bhagat Singh. After that, as a result, she was debarred from her school. Her political career continued, she also became a member of National Planning Committee and worked alongside Vijay Lakshmi Pandit and Mridula Sarabhai. So, so this is, this is like the early 20th century onwards, where we see active participation of Assamese women that changed the course of political sphere in colonial India. Quit India movement and Gandhi's visit to Assam in 1921 claimed to make an impact on women's mobilization. Gandhi wrote that if Assamese women respond enthusiastically, it would be of a great help to the nationalist movement. Addressing to women's weaving skills, Gandhi commented that Assamese women weave dreams on their looms. We can move on to the next slide. So basically, this is also the phase where we see rural women and their political awakening. So it was the political awakening for Assamese women who responded to the urgency for an organized movement. It was also the time where women across India were fighting for their own political agency. Women's movement across India brought up issues of women's education and political rights. Women mobilized themselves based on collective sisterhood and community of women. In this context, talking about women's writing, which appeared in the colonial period when women started to write, about different issues, about their political rights, about their education, right to education. Krishna Das, in her work, she mentions Gandhi's role. And again, as I said, Gandhi's coming of Gandhi to Assam and kind of the impact it had. Gandhi's first visit in Assam in 1921 proved fruitful in mobilizing women and instilling his three famous and powerful S in the hearts and minds of Assamese women, as I'm quoting, Satyagraha, Swadeshi, and sisterhood. On the need to establish women's organizations, Ratna Kumari Rajkhua on Jorhat Mohila Committee, she says that in another essay, which is titled Mohila Homitir Abhosyakata, which means the importance of Mohila Homiti, which is published in Ghar Duty, that such organization could contribute towards female education. She finds the conditions of Assamese women within the four walls of their homes very stagnant and urges women to gather strength in the form of education and to march forward, unquote. So the Quit India movement was extremely impactful. Many women laid their lives in different parts of Assam. As you can see on the slide, there are a few names that I have mentioned. Tileswari Bora from Dhekiajuli, Bhugeshwari Fukonani of Nagaon, which both of them were shot dead in 1920 and 1942 respectively, while participating in a public march trying to hoist the national flag. In 1932, Dariki Dasi Borua from Gulaghat was jailed for her active involvement in in the movement. At the time she was pregnant. However, she refused to take conditional release from jail, which eventually led to her death in the same year. So 1942 was an epoch for women freedom fighters and martyrs. As you can say, there are, again, I have mentioned a few names like Thunuki Das, Jaluki Kasarali, Leela Neugoni, Podumi Gogoi, Kumali Devi, Kahuli Devi, Reboti Lahon. These were also, they were the freedom fighters and martyrs. So, next slide. So when we talk about women's participation, we know that women from different strata, different sections of society were involved in the freedom struggle. So we see participation of tribal women in the freedom struggle. Women's participation was given a class. Most of the time when we look at writings, even feminist writing, a strong criticism has come that women's participation was given a class character, although we know that the contributions of women of different castes, religion, ethnic and tribes went unnoticed. In this context, I want to mention a very important name here. She was popularly known as Maloti Ma'am, who was one of the leading members of the anti-opium campaign in tea gardens. In 1921, she was killed by government supporters at Lalmati in Dorong district for supporting Congress volunteers in prohibition campaign. Mungri or Laluti Ma'am is said to be the first woman martyr of Assam in the freedom struggle of India. National Apsaras in Assam, published by Government of Assam in 2000, mentions other names of tribal women who were the active participants in the freedom movement. So, apart from women from Assam, we can also bring in examples or instances from other parts of Northeast. Two movements in 1904 and 1939, led by women of Manipur, are also the historic movements against exploitation and artificial famine which was the result of imperialist policies. As we are familiar with, the Mira Faivis of Manipur, Nishaband, Nupilan, they refer to two historic movements of Manipuri women. We can also cite in pan-Indian scenario, we can also cite examples from or instances from Tehbaga movement in Bengal that witnessed different experience of peasant women in Bengal. In a book named Unclaimed Harvest, an oral history of the Tehbaga movement by Kavita Punjabi, she illustrates beautifully the participations of peasant women. Similarly, Gail Ombit also talks about major rural upsurge between 1970 and 1973, which is a post-independent era. The years of famine and time where male organizers of various left parties testified to the fact that women, I'm quoting, women were the most militant. Women, they said, were in the forefront marches, the first to break through the police lines and fight, the tenacious in negotiations, and the inventors of new forms of struggle, which such as blocking of traffic on roads. This awareness of women as a force leading to a new consciousness of the specific problems of women's oppression as women along with class. So I just want to kind of share my experience, kind of from memory, like how when we were young and while talking about Konaklata Bora, like I just suddenly remember this, instance. So how do we remember? How is it represented in the public memory? You will see, in Assam, many young girls, where they have this competitions like Go As You Like. They will dress up as, young Konaklata. which is again is a marker or a symbol of martyrdom, representing the contribution that came from Konoklata and other women that were associated with, in different ways associated with the freedom struggle. So this is also like, when I was thinking about this, topic, there are certain areas that where I want to kind of, emphasized upon, not only that I want to talk about women's role and participation in as freedom fighters, but also at the same time, numerous activities were going on, which were mainly led by women's association. So formations of as a women's association led by, uh, in the beginning led by educated women, and later on also involvement of a women of different strata are remarkable to kind of talk about variations that we have when it comes to understanding India's freedom movement, right? So formations of numerous women's association in the very beginning of 20th century by the first generation of women, educated women must be mentioned. It was also considered the phase of feminist movement in Assam. So in this context, we can definitely mention the role of Chandraprabha Hoikiani, which is immense in this regard. She was also the promoter of women's education. Uh, so at the same time, there are several of associations which were emerging, such as Rayat Sabha, Satra Samminali, Ahom Sahitya Sabha, SM Association. These were some of the major associations emerged during colonial Assam. Similarly, many women's associations known as Mohila Committee were also formed mainly in the urban centers. And some of the prominent urban centers were Nagaon, Dibrugarh, Tejpur, Sibsagar, etc. In this context, we can mention Dibrugarh Mohila Committee, which is formed in 1950 by Dr. Tilottama Rai Chaudhary and Hema Prabhadas. Similarly, in 1917, Nagaon Mohila Committee was established by Chandraprabha Saikyani. Mahila Sammilani by Tara Prasad Soliha was the support, with the support of sister Kamalaya and wife Kanaklata Soliha in Sibsagar. So as you can see, various women associations were functioning efficiently, and these were all kind of established by women and which helped in women's mobilization, right? And they were taking up different issues, and mainly the question of education and political rights of Assamese women. So Chandraprabha Phakiani, her political and personal lives kind of, intrigued many scholars to question caste, marriage, and motherhood, because she had a very interesting life, especially when she faced caste discrimination, when she fell in love with writer Nandinath Kolida. But however, he refused to take her because of her lower caste identity. So these personal episodes definitely intrigued many scholars to look into questions of women's position and location in the society based on their caste identity. Because we all kind of understand that how women were kind of negotiating between two spaces, where they were talking about when they were out there participating in public sphere, and at the same time they were also kind of negotiating within the household sphere, household domain, right? So I guess many of the writings are available on Chandraprabha Phakiani, and which is actually kind of most of these are Many of them are, in fact, fiction, have published in fiction form, but there are also academic writings. But still, to kind of, to understand, to look at the availability of literature, it's very kind of, it's very difficult to kind of, spot or to locate their work, in the sense that many of these writings are also in Assamese language, which also kind of bring to the next point where there is a scarcity of writings, as well as absence of their contributions in the mainstream writing when it comes to locating women's role and participation, and most importantly, what kind of contributions that came from women belonging to different sections and strata of Assamese society. So we see some there are some representation in fiction writing and academic writing. For instance, one can mention a couple of movies which were made on iconoclata. And similarly, we can talk about, or we can just refer to Obhijatri, which is based on Chandraprabha Koikyani, and just to kind of give you a glimpse of what kind of writings, what kind of representation are there, and as you can see, there is a gap when it comes to writings, when it comes to representation of women who participated, who contributed to the nationalist struggle, in the freedom struggle of India, right? And it's interesting to me when I was looking at, when I was researching on the subject, and to be very honest, it was given to me on a very short notice, and it took me kind of some time to absorb and to kind of start working upon it. So I when I started researching on the subject, it was very difficult for me to find information, and interestingly, and how some of the informations about women freedom fighters and martyrs are part of some government portal, and there are like very brief discussions, very brief descriptions which are mentioned, right? They have a list of a few women martyrs and freedom fighters, and just a very few, two to three lines, not more than that. So it got me thinking that what kind of information are we supposed to absorb? What kind of representation are we supposed to kind of claim? And it's just not any simple claim, it's a political claim that we are making. And belonging from this region, we know that this history of this region is anyway very is not welcome when it comes to mainstream nationalist understanding of India. So we Northeast as a region anyway have a conflicting kind of history, and also presence of different various ethnic communities, indigenous groups make it so diverse. And most interestingly, when we talk about women's question, we try to bring in women's question. We have to understand that when we use a term like Assamese woman, it can also be seen as umbrella category, because who are the Assamese women? So, and this has been a matter of contestation for a very long time, right? Which also is associated with other issues when it comes to Assamese language and dominance of, and prevailing of historical prevailing and dominance of certain language, some language, right? And communities. So we have to also locate women's issues, women's questions, and also representation by keeping in mind the historicity of the region itself, the way in which this region was also formed, right? So we always know that there is a tension that we have when it comes to, like, sharing relationships with the so-called the mainstream India, right? And therefore we also have numerous movements, social movement claiming for separate identity or separate nation. Okay, these at the backdrop of these political kind of scenario, when we try to understand and try to locate women who who are who are represented, and women from what category, right? And therefore Sandraprabha Phakiani's example become extremely important, because in most of the time when we talk about women, we do not talk in the intersection of women, right? Different women coming from different backgrounds, so this is something that I can say that it's been missing in the writing as well as in the larger public consciousness. So when we have, therefore, the presentation also try to showcase women who are part of, a popular public memory, but there are also women who probably never made into the history writing or making of history. So there is a long way to go when it comes to digging more deeper into a question of women's identity, and especially locating them. I think this discussion shall further open new platforms to talk about women whose name probably we never heard, right? And this came to me also, as a surprise, that how there are government documents. Interestingly, I can just give me a minute. So I came across this document, of course, which needs, on which I really need to do more research on, where, where you'll find list of women freedom fighters of Assam who sacrifice. These are the categories. These are the three categories, So first category is list of the women freedom fighters of Assam who sacrificed their lives in India's struggle for independence, 1921 to 1947. List of second category is list of women freedom fighters of Assam who actively participated in the freedom struggle. Again, same period, 1921 and to 1947. So breakup of this particular information or about participation and other related information of 130 women participants who responded to these questions which were being asked, right? So interestingly, such documents also categorize women freedom fighters as those who sacrificed their lives and those who actively participated, right? And it's an enormous document, and it starts with the first category list of women freedom fighters of Assam who sacrificed their lives, and then it goes on to dividing on the basis of different districts, especially the list of women freedom fighters of Assam who actively participated in the freedom struggle start with Dorong district, and the list goes on. I wish I could could kind of, show you this document, but I don't think so it is possible because it's around 9 pages. And here is a list of women, who participated and who sacrificed their, life in the freedom struggle from this region. So what does it really tell us, right? This kind of documentation, this kind of archiving of, women who participated and sacrificed their lives, right? And I think these documents which I came across are not available, or even people barely know about these documents that exist, right? Probably there are some documents you'll have in the archive, but when we look at, works that are done on women's movement, there is a scarcity of information, there's a scarcity of representation. So that is also reflected when feminists were talking about history of women's movement in India, and the early writings on women in freedom movement, where they tried to trace women's involvement in the 1920s and 1930s. And some of the work that I have come across, such as The Role of Women in the Freedom Movement by M.M. Kaur, which was written in 1985. Similarly, Radhakrishna Sharma's Nationalism, Social Reform and Indian Woman, Feminism and Nationalism in Third World by Kumari Jayawardena, they all depicted women's role, political activities in tune with nationalist movement, and hinted at political mobilization, of women in India. Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, in her work, India's Women's Battle for Freedom, start on the premise that the existing works on Indian reform movement did not include women at all. So I guess it's also brings a critical sort of outlook towards existing writings on nationalist, writings on nationalist movement and women's participation. But within that also, when I was trying to, locate work, when I was trying to understand the history, I barely found work on Northeast region. I'm not saying there is no work at all, but also, it also kind of, comes from the very fact that how politically sort of, alienated this region has always been, right? So I think writings, so therefore the focus on Assamese women or many women from Northeast, now the focus is also coming from women who come from this region, right? But still, I guess, when we look at mainstream writing, there's still a lack, and how the question would be, so to how do we really kind of, talk about this gap, and at the same time bring women from Northeast and their contribution to a level where, where it is not only just available, but also understood, keeping in mind, the historicity of the region and the, social location of women from Northeast. So I guess so the purpose of this talk is definitely to familiarize with ourselves with history of women's role, their participation at the public sphere, and how do we really kind of, make it part of a public consciousness, right? And how it is part of a collective consciousness, right? Why is it important to, in fact, why is it important to talk about or discuss or even to write about women's participation, their role and contribution in a manner that, that what are we really, what is our intention? So that would also be a question that I would like to put across, and also to try to bridge the gap when it comes to writings on women's movement, history of women's movement, and how we see a big gap when it comes to women belonging to this region, and and what different perspectives can we have to locate Assamese women, which itself can be kind of put into question, looking into caste dynamics, right? The question of class, because most often when we look at the formations of women's organizations and formations of different women's association, it was also claimed by many that how it also gave a very class character, mostly led by educated women, right? And therefore there was this, a very, was an effort that I wanted to make through this presentation to include and to talk about women whose contributions were barely recognized, and even so maybe what we can do to further research upon this topic, or further kind of not only just research, to know more on this, to look at how they have been part of history books, right? So we can probably just look at our school history books, who are whose names are there, whose names are not there, and we can kind of start from the very bottom, that how the young generation are learning about our history, right? And because that the memory that I have of women freedom fighters, as I just mentioned, about that how young girls decked up or kind of dress up as Konoplata, and showcase her contribution, her sacrifice, right? So so we have to take it further, and to kind of not only just a young woman would understand by participating in a competition, but kind of further delving into the life of various women freedom fighters, and at the same time how they are located in our own history, right? Even it would be a critical sort of outlook, and we can in fact kind of have a critical outlook by introspecting, by critically understanding our own history, right? So so to understand, to kind of talk to I what I want to kind of conclude by saying that by asking this simple question, that what is our intention to understand, to talk about, to make it as a part of a discourse, right? Because it's very interesting for me when I was trying to sort of, research and doing a cursory internet search, the information that we have, especially in the government portals, it just such interesting. So I think we all should just go on the internet and see that, how government portals are also celebrating, in their website, they're celebrating these women. But yet, it's almost non-existent, right? So I guess I will conclude here. And if you have any questions, and I would like to take it up. And also, I guess I would like to kind of, further delve into, this topic. And I hope, whatever is presented, and you had some information, now you sort of, now you have some information on it, and we can just, take part in the discussion and probably, talk more on it. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Simashree. It's true that you have a very short time. I mean, I think I informed you on 23rd, and I understand that it was a really short time, and you prepared this presentation. But thank you so much for your presentation. And now, if anybody has any question.
If not question, just, some observation. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So,
ma'am, you have any question?
Can I say?
Yes,
Well,
yes, please, ma'am.
Actually, I can't say these are questions, because I think what Simashree's, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. I'm not. Is obviously making sort of delving into this research from a position of not being very well versed with writing from history, from the discipline of history on the national movement. Okay, so I'm not saying that as a critical. What I'm saying is that what we really need to do, when you talk to us about Assam, it would have been good if you could have also spelled out the different regional sort of locations and the variations within Assam, to also tell us then where the women come from into these movements, because everyone is not so familiar, even if we know the names of the districts. But in terms of the socio-economic development of that region, the very, very vast diversity, both in terms of regional development and also which is then reflected in terms of the people. When you raise the question, you very rightly raise the question of who's being represented, whether they're all being represented or and who's being represented. So this vast diversity, I think, determines the manner in which Assam gets linked to what is then seen as the nationalist movement or the freedom struggle. And it's a very vibrant, I have to say, from, I have a very clear memory, even though it is a very distant memory. I first delved into the records on the non-cooperation movement in 1975. And it is very clear that more than any of the, apart from the big urban centers, it is Assam which is where the women are very, very clearly participating in the non-cooperation movement in a very big way. So it's a memory which is there. It is visible in the records. It's visible in the police records, in the intelligence reports. It's there in the news reports of that period. So I think that paradox that you point to, that you draw attention to, that on the one hand, there is this participation. It is uneven. It is from different districts. That is there. And yet, how come it does not enter that much into the mainstream? It is there and it isn't there. Okay. I mean, then you come to two other questions, and I'll just briefly try to bring myself to think about it. Because, as I said, this is not criticism. It is about how to understand the process and by which linking up and integration has happened, and yet there has been a marginalization of perspectives, which is frankly the problem that independent India has faced in this region. But what I'm asking you is, I think when you do this research, it may be interesting to pose to yourself the challenge of understanding how is it that 100 years ago, when communications, when political lines, in a sense, were not so, to establish that link was not so easy. And yet there is this huge involvement from 1920s, we can see, definitely. Okay.
Right.
What is it that happens in independent India where this link is maybe not developed or it is disrupted? What are the policies, or what is the perspective that is followed from the center, maybe, or whatever? But why is it? And how does that link then shape up with the women's movement? So there are what I'm saying is that two ends. One is vis-a-vis what you see as the mainstream, or maybe the political center of India's power and authority. The other is the link within the region between the women who become active, who come to the forefront, and what kind of links are they able to establish within the region in terms of the diversity. And I would just add one or 2 points there also, that this diversity is part of the region and of the state of Assam today. But it is also true that there is a certain dominance of the upper castes in that social milieu. Okay. Now the Boros, I mean, Anjali the Mary and all these people, they've been raising whatever, from whatever standpoint, whether we agree or not, that's the question, is that they are asking for representation, and other regions of the Northeast also. So my question is, what would be a way of trying to make not only the in terms of mention of names, but that process of engagement of the writing of this history more inclusive, more representative? And I think that to you is the challenge. It's not just the Boros, there are various other tribal ethnic groups. There are 30 in terms of the Muslims, who are a fairly sizable group in Assam. So that was one. I was surprised that you didn't take up the metaphor of spinning, because I mean, it is amazing. Gandhi's message to women and the women of Assam, how they coalesce into this whole, I think more than any other part of India, spinning by women is representative of the women of Assam and their role, both. I'm not discounting other roles, but I think it is a very metaphorical in a sense, because Gandhi's whole message for women is spin, etc. And I think it is the women in Assam who follow that, maybe, hopefully till today, hopefully, with a lot of changes. These are just some thoughts. I had several other thoughts, but I found your presentation interesting in terms of the challenges it is posing. Just one point on regional history. I don't know if you are familiar, But I think Nehu brought, because look, the fact is that our history was not very inclusive of regional histories till the 70s. And it is in the 70s that even Southern history was, the history of South India began to be incorporated in our teaching and writing. But Nehu has brought out several volumes, the Nehu history department, on the history from a regional perspective. And I think that beginning has been made, and I'm sure I'm not totally familiar with everything that has come out, but I know that those volumes, even Joy Pachav's, these are very interesting sort of both work. Sonamani from Manipur, from our time as students, Sonamani Yambem, all these, plus the labor movement. You know, you're talking on two parallel levels. The tea garden and plantation, and there's a lot of disturbance in 1904, in 1920, in the Assam tea gardens. That also has some link with, sorry, I took long, but more questions necessary.
Right. Yeah, I guess.
You want to take all the questions together and answer, or?
No, I would just like to respond to Indu's observation and the question she's put up. I guess so. It was extremely, not like, it was definitely challenging for me given the time. Plus, you know, I work on gender, on different aspects of gender, and to delve into colonial history, women's history, with this short span of time was definitely a challenge to me. And I must mention, and I think when I first got to receive the call, and that's the first thing I in fact mentioned, you know, that, you know, do you realize that you are just giving me, like, you know, less than a week to prepare on such a vast topic? And considering I have so many other engagement in the university. But anyway, so that's not the excuse here, but that is definitely gave me challenge at various level to research, to understand more about, you know, women, history of women, and to locate it within the history of, you know, Assamese nationalism, plus so many others different movements which been going on, you know, since colonial time. And even then how we see the legacy of those movements in the post-colonial India also. So I guess it's pretty much a challenge that I took up in terms of, you know, just to give a brief overview of, you know, women's role, women's participation, and, you know, contribution, keeping in mind the theme also, you know. Secondly, I guess, you know, when we talk about, when we you know, as Indu has rightly pointed out, it's such a, like a, you know, vast subject, a women's movement, and then kind of, you know, trying to locate it in Northeast history, where, you know, when we were like, you know, where, you know, when we say colonial Assam, you know, now we have, you know, different states when it comes to, you know, Northeast, but the formation of Northeast then back then was, you know, completely different. We have the valleys and the hills and different communities living, you know, in different parts of you know, Northeast, and also bringing nuances and bringing diversity to the socio-cultural and political profile of this region. And I'm fully aware of it. I'm fully aware of the diversity. And because even contemporary issues which are raised on the on these questions of ethnic identity, and you know, and the very fact that there is a very dominant understanding of you know, regional sentiment and national sentiments, which are present in terms of how we, as you rightly pointed about, the caste parameters are there. And we definitely see caste question, like, how do we understand history from a caste perspective? Like, who are the people that are writing history at the first place? And, interestingly, when I was reading about issues pertaining to women in colonial India, and interestingly, so many there are small pieces which were published in different magazines, and I was reading this Assamese piece on women's education, and there was a comparison between Western education and how Assamese women be able to kind of adopt to education that come from very class notion, right? And also the fact that upper class women were upfront, in the forefront, in taking up women's mobilization and also being educated, right? So a very interesting sort of analysis which was made, that how would Assamese women, because women's education was a matter of discussion, and was seen how it should be a political right, and which is also happening at a much larger level, not only in India but across India. Women were talking about it, right? But the piece that talks about that how we have this Western notion that a woman, Assamese woman, would learn in English language, right? So now, do we have that much of luxury and time to cope with that kind of changes which were brought by Britishers, right? And interestingly, this writer kind of what he says, that if women start going out to the school, who is going to take care of the house, right? So that kind of, even at the peak of freedom struggle, nationalist struggle, and when women were trying to not only just participating in the freedom movement, but numerous issues were also coming along, and the question of education, remarriage, widow remarriage, and all these issues, which were social issues, were also equally kind of were part of public debate, right? But just try to, when I was trying to read and understand this piece, like then how do we bring this, like how do we look at these upper class men trying to understand women's issues, right? And then coming back to your question, that how does this whole idea of diversity, which is need to be kind of the question of diversity, which need to be more researched upon, and pertaining to this subject, pertaining to this theme. Therefore, I, in fact, that's why I, in fact, mentioned, the 1942 era, where participation of women was seen at a very massive level, right? And I also mentioned the places, the areas where they come from, right? And and you can see that Bhekiajuli in Lakhimpur is the Upper Assam, area that we are talking about, right? But also my question would be that, what if, there is a complete sort of, absence of women who actually participated and contributed, those who belong to different ethnic groups and communities, right? How do we get to know about it? So, so I guess that would be my analysis, and I would like to take up from that point itself, like from that, like, okay, I guess it's giving me a new kind of avenue to look at women's question within the history of, Northeast, and then kind of, locate it in the mainstream kind of writings on history and history making, I guess. Yeah.
Any other question? I think there is no question in the chat as well. So we are here. Thank you so much, Simashree, for your presentation. And no question. Okay. And thank you so much for presenting the question. At least we understand that there are so many names of Assamese women in the document, but there is a absence in the mainstream history writing, or the names are present in a domain, mainstream domain. There is an absence. Maybe there are selected women. Is there any other question? No. So thank you so much. And I would like to request all the participants to please switch on their camera for a photograph. Switch on their video for a photograph. Sundareshji?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Sir, it is done? Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess this talk itself has now like kind of, will be like, bugging me, and I will be thinking about it. And I guess it's a good thing that, it has raised many questions. And that's also the purpose of a discussion and a talk, that, it should raise more questions and kind of, lead to further introspection in a manner that we can do justice to the understanding of in not only this topic per se, but also like, anything that we try to understand and try to learn, and especially when it comes to history, right? Because there's numerous perspectives, and we can think, we can take up. And I guess yeah,
so the point is that please keep an eye. So we will have more lecture under this series on there must be some Northeast, other states will be covered. So thank you so much for everyone.
Thank you for inviting.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Yeah, we can.
Bye.
I can leave.
Yeah. Bye.
Okay. All right.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.